Golden Conversations. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm speaking to James Lynch, one of the most successful sport journalists, especially when talking about combat sports. James, I truly appreciate that you accepted to be here, and I'm looking forward to a good conversation.
Well, thank you for having me. It's awesome to come on here and talk some MMA with you, or my career, all this stuff. It's thank you for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
Of course, we've got a lot to talk about. Obviously, first of all, you've spoken to some of the biggest names in the sport. You've spoken to Floyd Mayweather, Conor McGregor, Daniel Cormier, Colby Covington. I'm curious to know, before you are about to have a conversation with such a big personality, do you have some nerves? Do you feel like some pressure?
Yeah, of course. I think everyone has nerves when it comes to interviews, but I've always had the same mentality, which is just treat every interview the same, whether it's an amateur fighter I'm talking to or a UFC champion. I think if you go in with that mindset, it makes things a little bit easier, and always just come prepared. I always in the back of my head have, a couple like stock questions like on backup in case, I forget what I'm going to say, or, what often happens sometimes is in like a media scrum, someone else might ask your question and then you're like, okay, I got to ask something else. So that just comes with practice. So yes, I do get nerves, but I think it's one of those things that just comes with practice as far as getting over that.
Yeah, so you basically treat all interviews the same way. You always come prepared. I wanted to ask you, why did you choose combat sports? Why exactly combat sports? Why not football or something else?
Well, initially, I wanted to get into covering hockey. I'm from Canada. A lot of people, love hockey here. I grew up playing hockey. That was the initial plan. And then I got into The Ultimate Fighter when I was in university. And I really took a liking to mixed martial arts. And I felt like as I was moving up in my media career, it might be better for me to go cover a sport like martial arts, which didn't have a lot of coverage back then. And so I just decided to, pursue that instead of hockey. And here we are. All these years later, after covering the sport for coming up to 6 years full time, and over a decade total. So it's been a fun ride so far.
Yeah, it's been a long journey, and I've seen that also you've worked on television. You've worked in television. You've got a lot of experience there, but then you became a freelancer. Why did you choose to start working on your own and to become a freelancer?
Well, I became a dad in 2017. And so what I was doing before was I had a regular day job. I was working in digital media on the television side of things, and I was doing my interviews and all these other things on the side. So I was actually making pretty good money because I was making money doing obviously my interviews. And then I had my full-time job, which was, full-time benefits, all that stuff. And it was going well. But once I became a dad, obviously you have more responsibility. So I kind of had to pick or choose. Do I want to stay in this day job that's very secure, or do I want to do this thing that's really fun and bet on myself? And so I decided to quit my job and do this full time. And I actually like it this way because everything falls on me. It's not, if I work for a big company and they're having budget cuts, I don't have to worry about that because I work for so many different companies now that if one company decides that they want to go a different direction, I still have other companies that I work for. So I'm always getting income coming in, always getting money coming in, and it's I like it this way, and I can make my own schedule, which is great too.
Okay, and so basically you are still a journalist, but you're also an entrepreneur because you're working for yourself. And now, what would you say to those people who want to become entrepreneurs or freelancers? Do you have to work more? Because when you have a normal 9 to 5 job, you've got that 8 hours, and then you go home and enjoy your free time. But now you say, I've got my own working hours. But do you have to work more now?
I'd say now I'm actually working a little bit less. I've kind of figured out a way to like manage it's been years I've been doing this. So at first I was working a lot. I was working weekends, all these different shifts, but now I've kind of made it as close to a 9 to 5 job as I can. It really just depends because some days I don't have full 8-hour days. Some days, I'm doing less than normal. Then other days, maybe I'll do a little bit more. So I think if you add up the week, I'm probably still doing about a, regular 40-hour work week. But, back when I first started, when I was freelance, I was definitely working a lot more, but as your profile grows, as you're making more money, you can obviously do less work and make more money. So it's a little bit easier that way. When I first started, I was working a lot more just because I was trying to make myself a brand in the industry, and now I've sort of done that on my own.
Yeah, and do you still work on your own, or do you have like some people working for you, for example, who edit your content,
No, I do everything myself. Yeah. So I all the graphics, all the editing, all the, scheduling interviews, doing the interviews, I do everything myself. And, I probably would work even less if I had people to do this for, but for me, I like controlling everything. I like being able to manage my own content and, just sort of, do things on my terms, which I really like.
Yeah. And obviously you've attended a number of UFC events. You've spoken to the biggest names. But how do you get to the UFC? How did you get to the UFC?
So the first UFC event I ever covered was John Jones and Alexander Gustafsson, the UFC 165 title fight in Toronto. I was living in Toronto at the time. And this was back when I wasn't full time. I was actually working as a editor for TSN at the time, which is like the ESPN in Canada. They have the UFC rights. Back then, they didn't have the UFC rights. Sportsnet had the UFC rights. So I was just freelancing for them on the side, writing a few articles on their website. And from there, I realized that I could get credentials because I was freelancing for TSN. They were a big mainstream outlet. They weren't sending anyone to the UFC event to cover it, and so I was able to obtain credentials through there. And I kind of figured out how the credential system worked. And then ever since then, I've always just found like a company that I work for that I'm able to get out credentials through. Now, not every the UFC is very strict when it comes to media credentials. So obviously, like not anyone can just get credentials. People get this mixed up. People think it's based off of who you are. It's more based off what outlet you're going for. Because I know from my experience, I right now I have UFC credentials through Sportskeeda. They're like a big company, so I'm able to go get my credentials through them. But it's always been like bigger companies that I've worked for that have allowed me to get those credentials.
Okay, and so basically you're saying that you need to work for a certain company, and then a company which is in contact with the UFC can actually help you get the credentials.
Well, no. So how it works is the UFC has a database. So you go through. They have a website that you can apply for media credentials, and on that that portal that they have, the online portal, you have to list obviously your job and who what your position is there, and then you have to put like an editor. So the outlet that I work for, like right now, for example, Sportskeeda, my editor, may or may not be in touch with the UFC, but the UFC has their contact information if they want to confirm anything or whatever. But as far as I know, they haven't contacted anyone, but that's just how it works. Is you have to sign up, through the UFC media portal, and then the UFC will let you know whether you've been approved or denied. It used to take a lot longer to get approved, but now they're very good about it. I just applied a couple of weeks ago for UFC 290, which is International Fight Week, and I got the email back I think a day later. And we're talking about an event that's taking place in July, so things have certainly changed in the process. But no, I set up everything myself. I just let the outlet know, like, hey, I'm going to be going to cover this event for you.
Okay. And could you describe for us your first UFC event? You got the credentials for the first time. So you go over there, you enter the arena. I mean, what are the emotions when you go in there and you see those big names, who we usually see on television only, and then you go there, you meet them. How do you feel when you do that for the first time?
So I actually covered a Bellator event before I did the UFC. So I think I got that out of the way the first time I covered a Bellator event. I mean, I remember, I think, trying to remember who was on that card, but yeah, obviously I follow all of MMA, so it is pretty cool. Like you're going to the weigh-ins, you're going to the pre-fight media scrums and things like that, and you're seeing these fighters that you watch on TV and you're like right next to them. So it's pretty cool. I never really got like starstruck or anything. I remember even like for UFC 165, I mean, seeing John Jones in person for the very first time, being able to interview him, like that was cool. I think I kind of got all that out the first event I did, which was a few years earlier. But yeah, so I mean, you don't go to an arena actually. So how it works is the UFC does like, they'll do like a pre-fight media availability, which I think was at some hotel in Toronto. I can't remember exactly where it was, but the way they used to do media day originally was they would have fighters sit on chairs and then you would go line up to interview them, or they do like a media scrum. And so I remember that event very vividly because everyone was lined up to interview John Jones, and I got like maybe I got like a question or two in, but I actually thought it would be better to go interview some fighters that weren't getting a lot of attention. So I remember Brendan Shaw, believe it or not, back then was on that card. Nobody was talking to him, so I got a good interview with him. Henan Barrow was on that card. People weren't really talking to him either. And Gustafsson, same thing. Like, I remember going into that fight, I mean, we're going back years and years and years ago. Gustafsson was considered to have like no chance in that fight. So people were really interested to talk to him, but I got a good interview from him as well. So yeah, it was a very, very cool experience covering my first UFC event.
Yeah, and so I mean that's really amazing to have the opportunity to go to a UFC event. That's actually a dream of mine. And I wanted to ask you, when you come, for example, from Europe, because I'm based in the Netherlands, I come from Bulgaria, but what is the path from the Netherlands to the UFC? What would be a good way? What path should I take so that I get there?
So I would recommend, I have a whole video about this on my YouTube channel about how to apply for UFC credentials and all these, basically everything you've asked me here. I have a whole video on this topic because I do get asked this a lot. What I would say is I think it's best to start covering some events on your own for yourself and go cover, you know, some European shows. Like, don't start with the UFC. Everyone has this idea that I want to cover the UFC. I want to cover the UFC. I think it's better to start off small so you can kind of learn how the process works, how you can learn how to, you know, do interviews at an event or, you know, do commentary or whatever it is that you want to do at these events and learn the ropes first. Like before I did the UFC, I did, like I said, Bellator. And then I think I did like a regional show as well, with some regional fights too. And it's just good to have that experience. And then, you know, once you feel like you're comfortable and you've kind of, you know, done an event or two, then you need to find an outlet to work for that. And you just, you know, you can pitch it to the outlet and find like a bigger outlet and just, you know, mention them, hey, I would like to cover this event for you. And, you know, sort of pitch it to them and say, hey, I'd be willing to do this for free, because a lot of these outlets are not going to pay you to go cover their event. Like when I did the event for TSN, even though I was working for them, I didn't get paid any extra. It was just, I wanted the opportunity to go and cover it. So I would say for someone like yourself, start pitching to, you know, major, you know, outlets out in Europe and see if they'd be willing to have you cover the event for them. And this way, and here's the other thing, like I mentioned about covering other events. If you're out there, let's say you're doing interviews, let's say you're going to interview fighters. If you go to like a different event, let's say you go to like Octagon MMA or like, I don't know, KSW or one of these European promotions, and you get a bunch of interviews, you can use those interviews to pitch to that outlet and say, look, I've done this before. That way they're not just going to, you know, because an outlet's not just going to send you to an event if they don't know what you're going to do, that you might embarrass them for all they know, right? They don't know. So what I would say is go to a couple events first, build up a bit of content, then go to this outlet and say, look, I've done this for KSW. I've done this for Octagon MMA. Would you be interested in me doing this for the UFC? And then, you know, they'll say yes or no or whatever. And then from there, you would then go to the UFC portal, apply for credentials, put them as your outlet, put your editor's name and number down, and then you would wait to see if you get approved or not.
Okay. And so basically start from the smaller organizations, get some experience, do some interviews, film those interviews, then use them like portfolio, show to some companies which could connect you to the UFC, and then you can get there. I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned sports commentating. You're a journalist, but you're not really busy with sports commentating. Isn't that something which you would like to do, or you're not really interested in sports commentating?
I have done commentary before, actually. I did 5 events for Rise FC, which is a Canadian promotion. If you remember, they've had a few fighters come through there that went on to the UFC. Tristan Connolly being one of them. I was actually calling Tristan's last fight for Rise FC in the main event, and he ended up going. He got signed to the UFC a few months later. There's a few other fighters that have sort of, you know, come through there as well that are sort of prominent on the Canadian scene. But for me, I like doing interviews. That's sort of my main focus. What I enjoy doing the most. You know, I've like I said, I've had opportunities doing commentary. I like it, but it's not like a goal of mine. Mine is more of just continuing to do my interviews, continuing to do my content on YouTube, and that's really what I enjoy doing the most.
So your true passion is YouTube and conducting interviews. How do the questions which you ask, because you got very decent questions, you don't repeat yourself, where do you gain inspiration for questions? Like, how do you come up with questions?
So obviously you have like the typical questions like, how's training camp? How's your weight cut? All that stuff that needs to get asked. And, people always say those questions are boring, but you still need to know the answers to those because it's important going into the fight. So you still have to ask those things. But what I like doing is I'll go to a fighter's social media page, like an Instagram or Twitter, and see what they're posting. Maybe there's something. I just interviewed Julian Erosa yesterday, UFC featherweight, and, he had a Seattle Mariners hat on yesterday. Which is a professional baseball team in the Major League Baseball in the U.S. And I asked him, I said, are you a fan of that team? I was curious. And he's like, no, I like representing Seattle because that's where I'm from. He's from Washington State. So we talked a bit about that. So I think, that's like an easy thing to do when you're interviewing fighters is like find those little things that they do outside of fighting. And then you can sort of talk about that. Another thing I like doing with a lot of the fighters, especially the ones that aren't as well known, is talk about, news topics. Look, the Endeavor just bought WWE the other day, which is also the owners of the UFC. What do fighters think about this? Do they feel like they're going to get paid more? Like these are things that you can discuss, like relevant news topics. We've got Israel Adesanya and Alex Pereira fighting this weekend. You can ask the fighters about that. Who do you think wins? Things like that are other ways that you can, come up with questions and different conversation ideas during the interview.
Okay, so you have to be creative. You can also speak on general topics and, of course, the usual questions. I wanted to ask you because you've got a very successful YouTube channel. You've got more than 40,000 subscribers. I believe 43,000, if I'm not mistaken.
44 as of last night, but close, very close.
Yeah. So you are doing very well on YouTube. How did you manage to grow your YouTube channel? Because I've also got my YouTube channel, and I also want to develop it. What advice would you give me?
Just a couple general things. I think posting regularly is a big thing. I see a lot of channels that will post like 10 things at once and then disappear for a couple months. I think being consistent is important. I think live streaming is very important to gain an audience. I do live streaming. I live stream twice a week, one on my main channel and then one on my other channel. And, I'm not doing that to make a lot of money. Like I don't make much money at all off of it, but I do it because it's a good way to interact with my audience. It's a good way to, give your opinion on things. And also, especially like this Saturday, I'll be going live after UFC 287. I mean, you finish watching a fight, you want to talk about the fight. So that's where I'll go online and talk to my audience and, discuss different things. And that's where I've been able to get a lot of my subscribers is from just doing the live streams. And then the other thing I would say is thumbnails. They're very important. A lot of people neglect the power of having a good thumbnail as far as, captivating an audience and different things like that. So those are like three big ones. But how I sort of made my mark was I was doing fighter picks. I would ask fighters about a bunch of different upcoming fights. I have this series called MMA Pros Pick. Now everyone's basically doing the same concept and they're stealing footage as opposed to me who's actually getting the footage myself. But that was how I was really able to build up my channel along with doing live streams. And then the other thing I'm allowed to do is I do interview a lot of fighters. The deal I have with every outlet I work for is that I'm allowed to use clips from those interviews on my channel as well. And what that'll do is that'll let people know who I'm interviewing because I can't upload the interviews to my channel, the full interviews. So I'll post these clips out there and then that will link back to the full interview. So the outlet's happy. They're getting people from my channel going to their channel. And then also I can, cut the clips down for the audience where it's, maybe there's a specific topic. I did a 30-minute interview with Colby Covington. There's a couple, really good tidbits in those interviews. So I grabbed some of those really important topics that he mentions and put those as clips on my channel. And that's also helped me grow my channel as well. I have a bit of a different, there's different ways that people go about doing their channel. A lot of people do like the long form videos and those do very well, but I'm more of like, I just like putting content on my channel as much as possible. So I'm always posting content on my channel almost every single day.
And you just mentioned Colby Covington, so you basically your tips are just be consistent, don't disappear, don't post 10 videos, then disappear for 3 months, be consistent. You can also use long interviews and cut them into short videos of interesting quotes, for example. But you mentioned Colby Covington. How do you get in contact with those people? How do you reach Colby Covington, for example?
So again, I have a video on my channel that talks about my process for interviewing fighters. With Colby specifically, I've been interviewing Colby for a very long time. And this is one of the reasons why when I started, I made a point of not turning down any interviews. I would interview pretty much anyone. And Colby was one of those fighters that before he started doing the whole character, I was doing interviews with him. So he always knew that, he knew who I was. And it got to a point at some point where, I got his phone number. And so we were able to kind of, get interviews that way. But what I do for the most part, for mostly for my interviews, I go through management. So I'm familiar with all the big management companies. You've got Paradigm, First Round, you've got Iridium. Like there's a ton of really big management companies that I work for on a regular basis, like work with, I should say, on a regular basis. And sometimes they'll let me know, like, hey, would you like this fighter to interview? And I'll be like, yes, that sounds great. Sometimes I'll have promotions, like, like just before I hopped on here, Octagon, which is a big promotion in like in Europe, their PR guy constantly pitches me interviews and says, hey, do you want these guys, to interview and stuff? So it's kind of a combination of that, but usually I'll go the management route first. And if the management doesn't get back to me, then I'll go to the fighter directly on Instagram and just send him a message and say, hey, are you available for an interview? I still to this day get fighters ignoring me or, things that happen, but I just try and, reach out to as many fighters as I can. And because I do a lot of interviews a month, I do somewhere up to, I think 50 interviews a month or something. So it's a lot of content.
50. So that's probably basically every day, at least one interview per day.
Yeah. I mean, well, it's more like I think I do interviews Monday to Thursday, and I do anywhere from, 4 to, sometimes like 8 interviews a day. It just depends on my schedule. But yeah, like today I think I have 3 interviews today, which is a bit lighter, but like tomorrow I have like 4. So it just depends.
And I also see you've got a very nice studio, like a lot of posters. And did you build it at your own house? Is it at your own house, or do you specifically rent at a certain place?
No. It's my own house. This used to be so I own a house, and this used to be a laundry room, and I turned it into like a studio. And it's actually really small. Like I have the posters in the back, but I have a desk and like a ring light and a camera and stuff, and it looks bigger than it is, but it's actually a really small space.
So that's your man cave, basically, kind of a man cave.
Kind of. Well, my man cave's in the other room because that's where the TV is. I just have, although I do have an arcade in here too, which is great. So I can play Street Fighter when I'm not doing interviews.
Yeah, and now you've achieved a lot throughout your career. You've got a lot of experience. When you look back, let's say 20 years ago, and if you meet James from 20 years ago, would James Lynch from 20 years ago have believed that he would have met Kobe Covington, Conor McGregor, John Jones, all those people? Would that younger version of yourself would have believed that would happen in the future?
Maybe. I mean, there was a point where I remember being in my 20s and being like, is this ever going to work out? Because I definitely had my struggles. I didn't take a traditional route to get where I'm at now. I always wanted to be on television, and I never really achieved that. But obviously the way we consume media has changed as well. Everything's going online as opposed to being like on regular TV. So I think I knew that I was good at this. Like I knew that this was something I wanted to do as a career. I just didn't know when it would happen, and it kind of just all came together, like I said, in like 2017, where I was able to just quit my job and do this full time. And I think I was optimistic, but I didn't know for sure if it was going to work out. So I think I would have told if anything, I would have told the old me to relax, because it's going to work out. Like I think there was a point where I thought, am I going to be able to do this any longer, like pursuing this, and it ended up working out.
And so you're saying when you were in your 20s, you kind of worried, you were not sure, okay, we will ever make it. I have the same problem at the moment. I'm now 24. I'll be 25 in September. And I truly want to make it. I want to reach the UFC. I want to speak to those names. I want to conduct interviews just like you, like yourself. What advice would you give me? Like, what steps should I take?
Build content, build a brand, find a niche. Like I think, I think the most important thing is, and you kind of revealed it here, is figure out what you want to do. It sounds like you want to do interviews. So that's a good place to start, is, starting to interview fighters. And don't just interview UFC fighters. Everyone makes this mistake where they're like, I'm just going to interview UFC fighters because they'll view better on YouTube or whatever, which is true, but that's not how you separate yourself. Why would someone watch a UFC interview from someone just starting off as opposed to someone who's established? Like who's going to watch, like for example, if you and Ariel Helwani interview the same fighter, people are going to watch the Ariel interview more just because it's Ariel, right? He's the number one interviewer in the sport, in my opinion. So I think it's good to interview a variety of fighters, interview up and comers. I can't tell you how many fighters I've interviewed that people had no idea about years ago and are now household names in the UFC. I'll give you a few. Sean O'Malley. I interviewed him back when nobody knew who he was. Mackenzie Dern, Curtis Blades, Jamal Hill. I remember interviewing Jamal Hill not that long ago, 2017. He was on the prelims of a regional card and we did an interview together, and now he's a UFC champion. So it's important to interview those fighters outside of the UFC, the up and comers, the prospects, fighters that are on Contender Series, fighters that, are looking to make their way up. I think that's really important. And then you develop your skill set, develop a library of content. And then that's where you can sort of, break through and start to get those bigger names. Because here's the thing that I think people forget, like these big management companies, they don't just represent the big names. They also represent fighters that are on the come up as well. So if a manager sees you do an interview with like an up and coming fighter and you do a really good job, he's probably going to be more inclined to give you that big interview because he's seen the work you've done already. So I would say just, I tell people when they start off, do like an interview or two a week. If you have the bandwidth, keep building up. Get feedback. Don't post stuff on social media and say, what do you think of this? That's silly. I see a lot of people doing that. Talk to people who have actually been there. Talk to people who are established that you respect, that can give you tangible feedback on an interview as opposed to putting it out on social media. Because people always do this and then they're, people are like, oh, great job. But it's like, those are the people that like don't hire you to like, do interviews for them. Right. So I would say, start building up a brand for yourself. Once you have a bit of a library, start pitching to websites, start pitching to like your cage side presses and your MMA news and some of these other sort of, not as prominent MMA websites. And then you get attached to an outlet. And from there, you'll be a part of a team and you can learn things from them. And then you slowly work your way up to the point of where you can start getting those bigger interviews and start going to events and all these different things. But the biggest thing I can preach is that it's a long game. Like I started doing this, like I said, I was full-time in 2017, which was a while ago, but I like started freelancing in like 2010, maybe around there, maybe a little bit sooner than that. So just think how long that's been. That's been, 13 years. It's been 13 years about since then. So that's a long time. Like, so you can't just expect to like, all of a sudden I'm going to work at MMA Junkie. It doesn't work like that. You have to work your way up. So that'd be my biggest advice.
Okay, so work your way up, be active, interview fighters. Even they don't need to be UFC fighters because, as you said, with Jamal Hill, he was not a nobody, but he was not a big name back then. Now he's a UFC champion. My parents are always pushing me. They're saying, "Okay, get a real job, like start working for a real outlet." Would you say that first you need to get a job at a real media? And then maybe in the future you can potentially become a freelancer? Or do you believe that also by taking the freelance way from the beginning, you can get far?
I would say have a day job that doesn't even have to be related to media. I don't think that matters. I think actually working for a big media company, I mean, it has its perks, but I just think the media is changing so quickly that like, you just find a job that's going to pay you enough money to do the things you want to do, whether it's save money, pay your rent, all these different things. Like that should be the focus. You should not get into MMA to make money because there's not a lot in it. And even someone like myself who has been doing this full time for a while, when I started at the beginning, it was tough. Like I mentioned, I was working a lot of different hours, right? It's not like your typical 40-hour work week. When I had my day job, I would work, 9 to 5, and then I would do my interviews from like 6 until 9 p.m. when I got home from work, and I would do that maybe once or twice a week. That's how I was able to, keep my day job and then still build my brand on the side. I would not recommend people with the goal of thinking I'm going to go full time in a couple months. It just doesn't work like that. Like you need to build up a brand first. I would say get a day job. Doesn't matter what it's in, media, not media, it doesn't matter. Get a day job. Do your content on the side and freelance on the side. Build your brand up that way because then you're not worrying about money. And then once you get to a point where, like I said, the freelance work is starting to pay better, then you can make that decision to, leave your job like I did.
That truly makes me happy because I do have a normal job. Like it has nothing to do with media. I work 40 hours a week, but every single minute when I'm free, I'm working on this, making interviews, so I'm very happy to hear this. That's like very important for me. I wanted to ask you one of my last questions. Basically, if you want to work for the UFC, but like I don't come from Canada, I don't come from America, from the USA. You can hear I've got an accent. Do you think that having an accent like mine, for example, is that a problem if you want to work for the UFC?
No, absolutely not. No. And let's clarify something here. So if you want to work for the UFC, then that's different than trying to be a journalist or a media member or something, because there's a fine line between that. So if you want to work for the UFC, then you're not a media member, you're working for the UFC. Does that make sense? Like you would like a Megan O'Leary, for example, who I love, amazing talent. Like she's awesome. She's not really a journalist because she works for the UFC. So she's essentially like there's sort of an angle of the work that she does, which is fine. Like I'm not criticizing her. It's just the job it is itself. That's different from an Ariel Helwani. Ariel Helwani covers the sport objectively, meaning he'll ask the questions about fighter pay or about things that need to be discussed. So if you do want to work for the UFC, just keep that in mind, that you sort of don't become a journalist at that point. You become an employee of the UFC. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense, but I wanted to ask, so for example, let's say if you want to be the new John Anik, or just if you want to be a commentator, do you think that then such an accent would be a problem?
No, not at all.
No?
If you're good at your job, I don't think it matters. No, I wouldn't worry about that whatsoever.
Okay. Well, that's great to hear. You know, that gives me even more hope.
Let me ask you a question. You said you wanted to do interviews, and now you're saying commentary. So what would you like to do? What would you prefer to do? Is it commentary? Because I have some ideas for you.
Actually, so I'm also doing commentary here in the Netherlands. There is like a big amateur organization, MMA organization, Cage Warriors Academy Lowlands, it's called, here in the Netherlands. And so I'm already doing commentary for them. But, you know, to be honest, I would like to do both of them, because giving commentary is not something that you do every day, but interviews, you can do interviews basically.
But you can do commentary. So this is one thing I would suggest, and I always tell this to people who are looking to get into commentary. Go on your YouTube channel, start live streaming during a UFC card, or live streaming during a, it doesn't matter what event, Bellator, European event, it doesn't matter, and do commentary. Like literally do that. You don't have to do like the exact, like you can describe what you're seeing, but you can also answer questions if people are watching your live stream. That's an easy way to develop a library of commentary. People think you have to go to an event to do that. Why can't you just do it from home while you're watching on TV? It doesn't matter. So that's something you want to do, I would start live streaming. That solves two problems for you. Remember I said it's important to live stream to develop those subscribers and everything. I would say do that. If you like commentary, do like a live stream, like during like for example, we just had the Bellator card last week. Do a live stream during that card. You don't do the whole card. You could do like the main card or something, or even just the main event, and just describe what you're seeing. And then, because I have people that will, like, I used to do this for the UFC, where I would like live stream during a UFC pay-per-view. Not everyone's buying the pay-per-view, so they want to know what's going on, and I'm describing it to them. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but which platform do you use? You stream to which platform?
YouTube.
Okay. So it's just on YouTube stream where you're commentating, and there just people are listening to your voice. You're just saying what is going on.
And they can see you on camera. Like you literally look at the camera like we're looking here, and you just describe what you're seeing on the other screen. Like I got two monitors, or you could just use one screen. It doesn't matter. Just describe what you're seeing, and people will watch you do that.
Okay. And when you do this, you basically gain, well, you're practicing. That's one benefit. But what other benefits would you gain from that? Do you get more?
So live streaming on your channel. So if someone's searching on YouTube and you're streaming live, like I'm sure you notice this on YouTube as well. If someone's going live on YouTube, their feed pops up to the top of your subscriber list. So how if you subscribe to a channel, you have all these lists of channels. If you're live streaming, you're going to go to the very top, because YouTube prioritizes streams that go live. So you could be like, here's a prime example. MMA fighting has 1 million subscribers, right? Let's say you're streaming at whatever, like early in the morning your time, which is nowhere near the North American time for MMA fighting. Even though MMA fighting has 1 million subscribers, if people are subscribed to your channel in MMA fighting, yours will actually go to the top because you're live streaming and they're not. Does that make sense? So that's where it's an easy way, because people, if you see a live stream, people sometimes will just click on it and that's a view for you. And then maybe they're like, hey, I like what this guy's saying, I'm going to subscribe to his channel. So that's an easy way to get subscribers. Not to mention there's the chat feature in YouTube as well. So let's say you're doing commentary in between rounds, you got a bunch of questions being like, hey, I scored that round for whoever, right? And you can say, yeah, I agree. I think that he definitely won that round, right? So that's just another easy way to interact with your audience.
Okay, so basically you get more engagement. You also practice. And my last question, obviously, for today, I was curious to know where do you see yourself, as a last question, where do you see yourself 10 years from now? Where is James Lynch 10 years from now?
The goal has always been to do everything on my YouTube channel and to have like sponsors and backers and just do everything there. Kind of like what Pat McAfee does. Like if you see Pat McAfee, who's like very famous in the US, he does everything himself. He owns the channel. He has employees. Like that would be the goal for me. Because right now, how I make my living is I sell my interviews to outlets and they pay me a flat rate. And this way I know exactly how much money I'm making every month, right? It's not like I'm worrying about, oh, is this interview going to view well? And I can pay my bills. It's not like that. So I would like to get to the point where my channel is big enough where I'm making enough money. I don't have to worry about views. So I'm making ad revenue off the videos. Plus I have back sponsors as well. And I'm doing everything myself. I'd love to live stream every day. I'd like to do like a daily show and interview fighters and, you know, do everything myself and maybe have some employees. That would be the ultimate goal, is to do everything just like specifically on my own. Because right now, if you think about it, my YouTube channel is kind of my side gig. Right? Like that's not my main focus. My main focus is doing those interviews that I get paid for. The YouTube channel is just something I work on the side on top of everything else.
And how difficult is it to make a living from YouTube, like only from YouTube? How difficult is that?
It's very difficult. Yeah, because how the YouTube algorithm or how the system works is you get anywhere from $1 to $3 for every 1,000 views on YouTube, which isn't a lot if you think about it. Like my Colby Covington interview did, I think it's 155,000 views. It made less than $1,000, right? Like it's that's not like that just from that one interview, which is actually pretty good. But if you think about it, like you can't just rely on every interviewing be viewing that well, right? So I'd say I make pretty good money on YouTube, but it's not enough that I think I would be comfortable making a living from.
Yeah, I understand it. Well, James, you've shared a lot of useful information with me. You know, I've learned a lot, honestly, and you know, this conversation, I will save it and I'll actually rewatch it a couple of times. I truly appreciate your time, and I wish you all the best. I hope that you manage to build your YouTube channel to the level where you can live only from it, that you don't need to do any other stuff. So I wish you all the best, and I'm looking forward to chatting to you soon in the future.
Yes, anytime you want me on, let me know. I would say to you, if you live in Amsterdam, do you know Marcel Dorf? Do you know Marcel, Big Marcel?
I don't live in Amsterdam. I live in another city on the northern side of the country.
I just mean even online, he would be a guy I would get in touch with, because Marcel is someone from Amsterdam that has done extremely well in this industry. He's a friend of mine. I would reach out to him if you have any questions about the European side of things, because Marcel would be the guy to know. He's a guy that also was working a regular job and went full time, I think about a year or two ago. And he's someone I would recommend getting in touch with. So I just wanted to mention that. Also, anyone watching this, Lynch on Sports, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. That's the easiest way to find all my content. LYNCH on Sports, easy way to find me. And yeah, thanks for having me on, man.
Of course, James. All the best, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you. Have a good day, my man.
Yes, you too.